Get ready because you're in for a huge treat. Are you a good speaker who want to be great? An ambitious novice who want to shorten your learning curve? Or do you think you are so good you find it difficult to believe you can get better? Wherever you are on your journey to become a speaker you want to be, we promise you. As a matter of fact, we guarantee you that our guest speaker has the unique ability to help speakers like us take our presentations from good to great. Patricia Fripp is a seasoned Hall of Fame keynote speaker, in-demand executive speech coach, sales presentation, and online expert. Meeting and Conventions magazine named her one of the 10 most electrifying speakers in North America. Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazine says, one of the best ways to invest in your career is to learn presentation skills from guess who? Patricia Fripp. Patricia is now virtually everywhere with her interactive web-based training at Fripp VT, Powerful Persuasive Presentations. Everybody, let's get our hands together. And here to discuss, under the magnifying glass, good to great presentations. Please get your jazz hands ready to welcome the speaker's speaker, Patricia Fripp.
Thank you. My journey has included 2 careers. When I was first at my first career was as a hairstylist. When I joined cable car Toastmasters, that was what I was doing. And I'll never forget the first day I met Larry Mariottini. It was 10:45 on a Tuesday in 1972. I walked into the lobby of this very shishi men's hairstyling salon where I worked, and there he sat, looking most uncomfortable. Someone had said to him, "You need Miss Fripp." Well, he didn't know if he needed Miss Fripp, but he was there. Larry Mariottini was a computer programmer for Levi Strauss. I guess you might say Larry was a nerd long before I knew what one was or dreamed I would want to grow up and be one. I took him back to my booth. I shampooed, conditioned, cut, sprayed, and fluffed his hair. He looked good. He didn't know he looked good, but he looked good. He walked out of my salon with a bag of shampoo, conditioner, hairspray, hairbrush, never spent so much money in a barbershop in his entire life. And he went back to work at Levi Strauss. And as he walked in, the women said, "Larry." He went home that night and his wife said, "Larry." Well, you can imagine, after a couple of days of this positive response, he realized he did look good. Larry became a regular customer. And as what usually happens when you change one small aspect of your appearance, your life, or your presentation, it has a tendency to spread. Larry joined a gym, worked out, trimmed down, bought some trendier clothes, and started acting in a more outgoing way. So much so that Levi Strauss offered him a sales position, even though he had no prior sales experience. Larry did so well, they cut his territory 5 times, and he still sold more than everybody else. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. This Fripp woman wants to take full credit for transforming this man's life, getting him a better paid job, and shall we say, more attention at home. Well, obviously, Larry had a lot to do with it. However, consider this. Every day when I went to work as a hairstylist, I could have looked at my job from one of 2 ways. One, I have 16 heads of hair to cut. Or as I chose to, I have the opportunity to positively impact 16 people's lives. And when we do whatever our job is or deliver our presentations in service of others, not only are we going to build clients for a lifetime, we are more likely to feel alive. And from hairstyling to speaking, that's how I built my business. Now we find ourselves, of course, waiting to go back to work on stage. And it might interest you to know, as we look under the magnifying glass, which means to take a closer look at small portions of our presentation to make it go from good to great, whether we are working on stage or, of course, behind our computers, many of the principles are exactly the same. Now, you might be thinking, as many people do, well, you used to be a hairstylist, now you're a speaker. There's got to be a big difference. In fact, in the year 2000, 60 Minutes came to the National Speakers Association convention, and they asked that question. Perhaps you'd like to hear how I answered.
This former hairdresser, like others in the trade, is a born talker.
When I was a hairstylist, I worked on the outside of people's heads. Now, as a motivational speaker, I work on the insides of their heads. There's only half an inch difference.
That line got me on 60 Minutes. That half inch has made me millions of dollars, but not all in the same year. Well, enough about me. Let's look at you. We are going to bring up a poll, and we want you to answer from your point of view. Do you consider yourself a novice, intermediate, or advanced speaker? So if we can bring up the poll, you'll have 1 minute to answer. And it doesn't matter where you are in your journey. Now, do I see the poll come up? No. Well, it doesn't matter then. So what I want you to think, it doesn't matter if you consider yourself a novice, because I promise you, you will get some techniques from this presentation, which will help you get off to a really good beginning. If you're intermediate, then you already good, and you will look at how we fine tune what you're now doing. And if you are advanced, you're probably thinking, Fripp, I'm so good, I should be doing this instead of you. Well, I'm confident that even you, as an advanced presenter, will get suggestions and ideas that will work for you. In our second session this afternoon, you will see how we put these principles into action with 4 of your brave volunteers.
An important part of being an effective speaker is not magic. It's technique, knowledge, skill, and preparation. This course will provide you techniques for making sure your audience connects with you as a presenter and with your message, the way you meant it. The most important part of this course is to remember, it's all about the audience. Yes, I know. You want to be remembered as an intelligent and dynamic presenter. However, if an audience of any size feels you're concerned and interested in them, they will remember you positively.
My first best suggestion is our message has to be focused on our audience. When I was putting together my online learning program, that was a very time-intensive project. And I don't know about you, but I am more of a short-term project person. I was doing my very best to not get distracted. I opened my email and there was a message, "Dear Patricia, I'm a big fan of yours. May I interview you for my blog?" I wrote up an email that said, "I'm honored, I'm flattered, I would be very happy to be interviewed, working on a big project. Can you contact me in 3 months?" And I thought, well, before I hit send, let me check his website. Naturally, I picked up the phone and said, "What is an Emmy Award-winning TV interviewer and game show host doing being my friend, my fan?" Now that you know that I am totally shallow. And after a 30-minute interview, he said, "Patricia, this is great information. I have enough for at least 4 blog posts. However, tell me, what is the #1 secret of delivering a powerful, persuasive presentation?" And I said, "Oh, there's no one secret." And then I realized a brand new Frippicism was about to fall flawlessly from my lips. And I said, although there is no one secret, if there were, it would be that your subject is of interest to your audience. And you're probably thinking, well, how can that happen? As best we can, we need to understand one important principle, and that is everybody is more interested in themselves than they are in us. And we need to watch as much as possible the I versus you balance. Look for ways that we can include our audience into our presentation. And I suggest you collect you-focused phrases. For example, in your experience, how often have you? Can you relate? Let's go back to, if you had been there, I wish you could have been there. You know what happens when. And as you're going through your own presentations, look at ways that you could make it more you-focused than I-focused. That will make the audience feel more that you are talking just to them. Now, with virtual presentations, of course, we are not really talking to we are talking to an audience. We're talking to one person. Now, even if you have 1,000 people in front of you, or 100 people in front of you, or even 10, if I was on stage in person, it's good, although you might address District 103 welcome, you might address the audience. Most of the time, you talk to one person, you, and everyone will hear you were talking to them. Which leads to my second best suggestion. So take a closer look at one you-focused language, and the second best suggestion, open your presentation with impact.
Welcome to You Have Choices, Options of Openings, the Techniques. As you soon will come to discover, our subtitle is How to Open Your Presentation with Impact. At the beginning of a speech, presentation, seminar, client meeting, report to senior management, sales presentation, or any manner of presentation you deliver, you need to arouse interest in the subject. After all, we stand in the rain to see a movie. Would you stand in the rain to listen to your presentation?
So the #1 principle is arouse interest in the subject. Very often we do too much waffle before we open our presentation. So let's look at some of the techniques that you can use. Obviously, a good question, and many Toastmasters use a question to open a presentation. And if you have ever used a question, perhaps you say, have you ever walked into a room of strangers you genuinely wanted to meet and didn't know how to begin a conversation? Or have you ever stood up in front of an audience and forgotten how you were going to open? In that case, what I would encourage you to do is to add one word, because the difference between good and great, one way is one word. And in this case, it's how often. Because if I asked you, have you ever stood up in front of an audience and forgotten what to say? You'll say, yes, and I lived through it. I hope it doesn't happen again. If I was to ask you, how often have you? Oh gosh, several times. Oh, then you are more likely to want to know what the speaker is going to tell you. How often have you? That'll make a difference. Another way to use a question is what I call a rhetorical question. In your presentation, you could say, if I were to ask you, is 2021 the year you double the quality of your presentations? Perhaps you'd say yes. Perhaps you'd say no. Most likely you would say, Patricia, I would love it to be, can you tell me how? Well, great news. You're at the right place at the right time. And in the next 50 minutes, you will learn 4 ways to make a good presentation great. The formula is yes, no, I would like it to be, and add your name to it as if they are asking you. Because having spoken for decades, I promise you, an audience might love you and still forget your name. So let's look at the second way, is an interesting statistic or little known fact. This is a personal favorite of mine. And I promise you, if you look at many of the presentations you deliver, you will find an interesting statistic or little known fact. And I often challenge my coachees to see if you can pull out the statistic and put it at the beginning. Now, if you do that, and even if you use the statistic throughout the body of your presentation, add an emotion. Would it interest you to know that? Would it surprise you to know? Would it horrify you to know? Would it excite you to know? For example, would it interest you to know? Now, again, by using that phrase with you in, your audience has a tendency when they hear you to think, oh, what? Would it interest you to know that according to the Wall Street Journal, executives who can speak without notes earn 72% more income for those who can't? Now, it could be that you make a statistic more personal. For example, I was coaching somebody that said, according to research, 80%, or I think it was 70% of employees are not engaged. And I said, that's great. Bring it up to the front and then change it by saying, would it shock you to know that 70% of your employees are not engaged? Now you take the statistic, add the emotion, and make it personal. All right, let's see what the next one is. A story or example. And obviously, we are going to discuss stories because great speeches have stories. Now, in this occasion, we opened really with a story about Larry Mariottini. Now, when you are talking about characters, we need to understand who they are, a little backstory, whenever possible, add some dialogue, even if it's as simple as Larry. And the next one would be transport your audience. Now, when you transport your audience, there are two ways you can take them: into the future or to the past. If you use the expression imagine it is April 2022. You're getting dressed to go out and deliver a presentation, and you take a moment to reflect that for the last year you have been paid to speak. Your audience evaluations have been incredible. You have never received as many standing ovations and have as many people want to wait and shake your hands at the end of your presentation. You take a moment and ask yourself, what was the difference? And you reflect back to April of 2021, when you attended District 103 conference, and you heard there are 4 ways you can make a good presentation great. So you can see, you can take them in the future and then bring them back. Will that be a reality? Only if you take action on what you learned. If you want to take them to the past, you can use an expression like, let's go back to January the 3rd, 1986. Or, I wish you could have been there at my daughter's wedding. That's ways you can transport the audience. Now, very often you might have to give a presentation on what you do for a living. What my next door neighbor, Mike Powell, used to be a senior scientist at Genentech. And in the 90s, he was working on developing an AIDS vaccine. And I said, Mike, I would love you to come and talk to my professional women's organization on the work you're doing. But understand, we don't spend time with scientists. And even if we did, we probably wouldn't know what they were talking about. Tell us, what is it like to be a scientist? And he walked on stage and said, being a scientist is like doing a jigsaw puzzle in a snowstorm at night, when you don't have all the pieces and you don't have the picture you're trying to create. Now, I challenge you to come up with an opening to a presentation about your job or being a Toastmaster, and use words that are so visual, because I am sure, as when I say it, I see images. Being a scientist, I see a man in a white jacket, or a woman in a white jacket, or a team of professionals in white jackets. It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle. I flash back. My brother and I as kids, used to work on jigsaw puzzles. I see that image in a snowstorm. At night, the picture changes. You don't have all the pieces and the picture you're trying to create. That is a great way to explain the frustration. 2 ways to go from good to great. Watch for you-focused language and less eyes. Second, open your presentation with impact. You have many of options, and I'm going to direct you to a page of handouts where you can download 24 opening lines and 24 techniques to open a presentation. All right, the magic of real life modern day technology. Something happened, but we are back, we're together. So with stories, characters are about people, and we want to hear them talk. So for example, I was coaching one of my executive clients, and he was talking about corporate citizenship. And I could tell that this was a subject he was passionate about, and we needed to add more color to his presentation. And I asked him, Bernard, how would you explain corporate citizenship to your children? The power of a good question. And Bernard said, it was the day after Christmas, and I sat both my children down and said, you are really lucky children because you have generous parents and even more generous grandparents. And perhaps you would like to take one of your presents or a gift certificate and give them back to us, and we will cash in the money and give to children who don't have homes. And he said, I was so proud of my 14-year-old son. He said, Papa, how much do I give? Because I could give you all of my savings and all of my pocket money and all of my Christmas presents, and it wouldn't be enough to make a difference. How much do I give? And Bernard said, oh, you never give it all. You just give enough that it hurts a little. That story takes less than a minute to tell. And if you had it transcribed, most of it would have quotation marks around. That is delivering the dialogue rather than reporting on the dialogue, where Bernard said, well, I was talking to my children, explaining the importance of contributing to children who were less lucky than them. That is reporting on the dialogue. So if you just remember, characters speak, and we want to hear what they say. There is another technique with stories that might help you as you're looking at your own stories. Put them together in a certain way that begins with when. I was at a National Speakers Association meeting, a young woman. I bring people up from the audience, very much as we are virtually doing this afternoon. And she said, her story was, my dad walked into a diner, looked at the waitress, and thought, that's my wife, in 1946. And I said, I'm sure this is a great story. However, you need to put it together differently. Begin with when, where, who, what happens. So when, in 1946, by beginning to when it is, it puts the rest of the story into context. For example, you do not have to have been born in 1946 to know this was the end of World War II. You've seen movies, you've heard stories from your parents and your grandparents. You've learned history. You have an idea of the time. 1946, my dad. Now, I don't know about you, because we all see stories differently. I see her dad as a soldier, and I have an emotional connection to anybody who serves either of my countries in any branch of the armed services. So I'm already rooting for her dad to get whatever he wants in the story. walked into a diner. Now you understand you have a different idea of what a diner would look like than if you thought it was last year and 1946. Perhaps your image goes to black and white. Again, we've seen theme restaurants, we've seen movies, we have ideas of what it might have looked like. He looked at the waitress. Now, I don't know how you would imagine the waitress, but I imagine the waitress blonde with a pinny, perhaps a hairnet, thick, white, rimple-sole shoes, because she stands up all day. And I bet she said to him, honey, would you like some pie and coffee? He looked at the waitress and thought, that's my wife. Now that just imagine of setting up the story by following when, where, who, what happens. Now this is a quick example for you to work on, because one of the principles, and this comes from my friend who is a Hollywood story consultant, Michael Haig. And one of his techniques is always get into the scene late, get into the scene fast. So often we do so much setup to get to the action that it's anticlimactic. Now, if the opening of my speech was Mary had a problem, you're probably thinking, who's Mary? What's her problem? Now, remember, we have to give our character a backstory. We need to know a little about Mary. Mary was a seasoned HR professional. She had spent 20 years working, running HR departments in the most prestigious companies in Silicon Valley. Now, we are right into the speech. We know she has a problem. We know she's very seasoned, 20 years experience. What do you know that I don't have to tell you? You know Mary eats problems for lunch. You know Mary is the person everyone comes to with their problems. You know that because of her experience. Then John walked into her office and said, Mary, we're going to be sued for $28 million, and I think it was my fault. Dialogue into the action. Get into the scene fast. So let's go to my fourth best suggestion. I'm famous for a phrase in speaking, specificity builds credibility. We are turning into a world of sloppy speakers. And it isn't necessarily always our fault, because we, especially in the world that we're living in now, we communicate less, we text, we abbreviate, and I'm not quite sure if the English school teachers are as tough now as they used to. I work in Silicon Valley with brilliant engineers, and I am amazed what comes out of their mouths. When we address each other, so often we call our colleagues you guys. And I encourage people to, as best I can, to stop doing that, because what we do in times of pressure and delivering a client demo, talking to a prospect, talking to senior management or a customer, what we do in high pressure situations, we revert to what's comfortable. My most frequently asked question of my clients is, if it were not a thing, what would it be? For example, one of my brilliant clients was talking going through his presentation for a customer conference. And he said, there are two things people love about. And I asked, if there wasn't a thing, what would it be? He said, there are two innovative upgrades. I said, there are billions of people in the world. What people love your innovative upgrades. He said, systems administrators. Can you see the difference in the quality of the communication between there are two things that people love compared to there are two innovative upgrades that systems administrators love? And remember, as you are reviewing your presentation, if it were not a thing, what would it be? Again, I hear a bunch of ideas, a bunch of people, a bunch of suggestions. If it's not fruit, it's not a bunch. Is it a handful? Is it 10? Is it a ballroom full? Even if you said, I walked into the room, well, we don't know what size the room is. I walked into a ballroom or I walked into the boardroom. The size, the image, we use words to communicate, and as often as possible, we need to help give specifics. The next one is, if you can't weigh it, it's not a ton. You don't get a ton of ideas. You don't meet a ton of people at a trade show. Well, if you had, I always say, if you had a ton of business cards from a trade show, you would still be out looking for a forklift to try and help you get them home. How do you take a good presentation and make it great? My best suggestion is, in your presentation, record it. In everyday life, perhaps record your side of conversations or your team meetings or even at the dinner table to look at the quality of your words. The 4 ways, obviously make your best efforts to use as much you-focused language as possible. Minimize the I's. It is not possible to speak without saying I, but see how you can minimize them. 2, the purpose of the opening of your presentation is to arouse interest in the subject. 3, stories are about people, and we like to hear them speak. Give them a backstory. Get into the scene late. Remember, stories have to be true, not 100% accurate, because what we do in stories is shrink time. And then specificity builds credibility. Look at the quality of your words. Now, at this point, I hope you are thinking, this is really interesting, and how can I get more from Fripp? Well, I will be seeing you this afternoon, and I hope you're going to be with us. And I certainly hope you take the suggestions you hear from me and from all the other great speakers at your conference to improve yourself. If you would like even more help from Fripp, take on my presentation secrets. Difficult to sum up 40 plus years. However, I do my very best for you. As you've heard, I have an interactive online learning program called Fripp VT. You can go take a trial, check it out. And if you remember Fripp, my name, if you're interested, this is a very cost-effective way, but for you, you could save 20%. Go take a trial. I have a masterclass coming up on May the 15th. And if you go, this is my gift to you. If you go to fripp.com/handouts, not no, but after the session, you will find there are pages of some helpful videos to reinforce what you've learned, special reports, speech diagram, and the openings of options. If you want to check out, you can see on that same page about my masterclass, and D103 saves you $50 if you're interested. Fripp VT, your coupon code is Fripp for 20% off. And you can always write to me any questions that come from this session. You can write to me. You want a personal demo, just write to me, P. Fripp. You want to take a picture of that? That's all the information you need. My suggestion to you is don't wait. Create your next presentation and look at it from these points of view that you've heard about you, openings, stories, and specificity. When you're a speaker and you tell stories about people from your past, you sometimes wonder, I wonder if the people I'm talking about see it the same way I do. 15 years ago, I was speaking at the District 4 conference. This is in my area. I was in San Jose, and I told my Larry Mariottini story. And when I finished, the district governor, good-looking, gorgeous woman with masses of red hair, came up to me and said, you know, I used to know Larry Mariottini. And he told me you did change his life. You shaved off his Elvis Presley sideburns. And she said, do you know where he is? And I said, no, and I've really tried to track him down because Larry's story's all over YouTube. I thought one day I'm going to hear from him. And she said, I am committed. I am going to go out and find Larry. And would you believe that very day we had the conversation, his kids put up a Facebook page for Larry. She connected, we all got together. And I said, Larry, I remember hearing about how successful you were as a salesperson, someone that came from a different background. But now that I'm older, now that I'm more sophisticated, now I understand technology. How did you do it? And Larry said, I was the one that set up all the inventory systems and what was the beginning then of tracking our customers. So once I had more confidence and I was more outgoing in my little office, I sold more than some stores because I understood the technology and the tracking. And they kept offering me jobs to be a sales manager. I didn't want to do it because I wouldn't have made as much money. And then I said, so really, I believe what I learned from talking to Larry Mariottini is the future belongs to charismatic communicators who are technically competent with great communication skills. Congratulations for your commitment to your communication skills, and I'll see you later.
Thank you, Patricia Fripp. It doesn't matter about technology, whether you're going in and out, you're still amazing. And thank you, you will always be amazing.